He said, I fed you with milk and not with solid food, for until now you were not able to receive it, and even now you're not still able, for you're still carnal. He says, where there are envy, strife, and divisions among you, are you not carnal and behaving like mere men? See, there's no church, even the most doctrinally sound and spiritually mature, that is immune from the threat of this sin, and nothing can more quickly divide and weaken a church. I have to say, if you don't have a biblical reason in leaving a church, you left out of pure selfishness. That's the only other option, is it not? Well, this word here, it's translated in various ways. It's translated self-seeking. It's translated strife. There in 2 Corinthians 12:20, Paul said to the Corinthians, I fear lest when I come I shall not find you such as I wish, and that I shall be found by you such as you do not wish, lest there be contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, the King James says strife, backbitings, whisperings, conceit, tumults, of our own importance and character, which the truth about our insignificance as creatures and vileness as sinners would produce. It will lead us to a willingness to perform lowly and humble offices that we may benefit others. It goes back to our definition about the holiness of God and the sinfulness of man. William Barclay, he adds to it, he says, there is always the danger that people should work not to advance the work, but to advance themselves. It's extraordinary how time and again the great princes of the church almost fled from office in the agony of the sense of their own unworthiness. And he gives some examples, like Ambrose, who was one of the great figures of the early church. A great scholar. He was a Roman governor of the province of Liguria and Aemila, and he governed with such loving care that the people regarded him as a father. The bishop of the district had died, and the question of his successor arose, and in the midst of the discussion, a little child yelled out, Ambrose, bishop. The whole crowd took up the cry. To Ambrose, it was unthinkable. He fled by night to avoid the high office that the church was offering him, and it was only by the direct intervention and the command of the emperor which made him agree to become the bishop of Milan. When John Ruff publicly from the pulpit in St. Andrews summoned him to the ministry, John Knox was appalled. In his own history of the Reformation, he wrote this, thereat the said John, abashed, burst forth in most abundant tears, withdrew himself to his chamber, his countenance and behavior from that day until the day that he was compelled to present himself in the public place of preaching, did sufficiently declare the grief and trouble of his heart. No man saw in him any sign of mirth, nor yet he had pleasure to accompany any man for many days together. So far from being filled with ambition, these great men were filled with a sense of their own inadequacy for high office. That's humility. That's humility. You know, this is a dominant virtue in the Old Testament. Solomon said in Proverbs 11:2, when pride comes, then comes shame. But with the humble is wisdom. He said in Proverbs 16:19, better to be of a humble spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoil with the proud. When you think of someone being humble, do you think of people in the Bible that the Scripture mentions as humble? Like Moses, Numbers 12 and verse 3 tells us that Moses was very humble, more than any man who was on the face of the earth. Wow! I mean, we read bad things about people in the Scriptures, but this is the highest honor right here. This is true greatness. True greatness is not asserting yourself. True greatness is humbling yourself. David said in Psalm 138:6, for though the Lord is exalted, yet he regards the lowly, but the haughty he knows from afar. In another psalm he wrote, Psalm 37:11, the humble will inherit the land. And that right there is quoted in Matthew chapter 5 as one of the Beatitudes, where it says in Matthew 5:5, blessed are the meek or the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. This is the attitude that we are to have. This is the attitude that we are to adopt. This is why I recommended this verse for us to memorize. Especially in this day and age in which we live. It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. Selfishness is going to continue to manifest itself, is it not? Go with me to Romans chapter 1 for just a moment. And notice in Romans chapter 1, where we hear the whole decline of the whole entire human race. He says there in verse 28, you'll notice really 3 times, verse 24, verse 26, verse 28, where it talks about God giving them up, or God giving them over to the lust of their own heart, God giving them over to degraded passions. Verse 28, God giving them over to a depraved mind, to do those things which are not proper, being filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, unmerciful. Does that kind of sound like our culture? Let me show you another place. Go to 2 Timothy 3. Paul warns Timothy about difficult times. He tells him that in the last days difficult times will come. And what does he say in verse 2? For men will be what? Lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, revilers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable, malicious gossips, without self-control, brutal, haters of God or haters of good, treacherous, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, holding to a form of godliness although they know they have denied its power. Avoid such men as these. Avoid such men as these? Discernment. Discrimination. We have to be that. You live in a neighborhood and you got some bad influences that live in the neighborhood. Do you let your kids hang out with them? Let your kids play with them if they're bad influences? Then why do we do it? 1 Corinthians 15 says, bad company corrupts good morals. After a while, it breaks down your standards. You become just like them. Those you once condemned, you now commend. Happens a little at a time. We have to be willing to regard one another as more important. See, genuine humility involves believers not thinking highly of themselves. It actually requires that they regard one another as more important than themselves. Any high thinking that you and I should have should not be about ourselves, but it should be about other people. It's like that little antidote I shared with you. I think I read it from Warren Wiersbe a while back. Jesus first, others second, self third. That's humility. Jesus first, others second, self third. What's he say there? Go back to verse 3. Regard one another as more important than yourselves. One version reads, esteem others better than yourselves. And it means more than just having an opinion. It refers to a carefully thought out conclusion based upon the truth. It does not mean to pretend that others are more important, but it is to believe that others are actually more important. J.B. Lightfoot says it's each thinking the other better. That's good. Albert Barnes says, this is one of the effects produced by true humility. See, instead of fixing your eyes on those points which you excel, fix them on those in which your neighbor excels you. There's this part of our fallenness that we don't want people to excel over us. We want to be better than them in everything. But we need to learn how to reverse that. And we need to learn how to bring out the best in others and to want them to excel in the areas that you're weak in. If you want that, you're going to benefit from that because you're going to benefit at what they're good at. You know, you don't have to be, what's that little phrase? Let me say it in my